Welcome back to Deep Dive into Books.
Glad to be here, guys.
Today we're diving into a really intense topic, but before we jump in, a quick shout out to the community. If you want deeper written breakdowns, comprehensive reading lists, and exclusive essays that go along with these videos, you have to head over to our Substack.
Yeah, it's seriously the best place to continue the conversation.
Exactly. Check it out at substack.com at Deep Dive into Books. We post all our deep dive materials there.
Highly recommend it.
So today we are tackling something that's been making massive waves. We're doing an intensive deep dive into Gad Saad's highly influential and, well, incredibly polarizing book, Suicidal Empathy, Dying to Be Kind.
Oh, yeah. This one is a lightning rod.
It really is. We've got a comprehensive stack of sources here, detailed summaries, framework extractions, and our mission today is to figure out exactly what Saad means by suicidal empathy.
Right, because it's not just a catchphrase. He's built an entire architectural framework around this idea.
He has. We're going to unpack how he applies this to modern Western society and, honestly, why this specific worldview has gained so much traction with huge public figures and tech billionaires right now.
It's totally shifted the cultural conversation.
It has. But guys, before we get into the weeds of evolutionary psychology and all these aggressive policy critiques, I need to make a very explicit disclaimer.
Yeah, this is important.
The material we are covering today is inherently political. It is highly charged. It touches on, the most fiercely debated cultural flashpoints we have right now.
Immigration, criminal justice, gender dynamics, the whole 9 yards.
Exactly. And as your guides on this deep dive, we are completely impartial. Our goal is absolutely not to endorse, validate, or take a side on Saad's right-wing and conservative perspective.
We're just the messengers here.
Right. We just want to meticulously report and dissect the ideas in the original text so you can understand how this worldview is actually built. So whether you end up agreeing with him or totally rejecting it.
Which a lot of people do.
Understanding the mechanics of this suicidal empathy concept is just vital for navigating modern discourse.
It really is the ultimate decoder ring for the culture wars right now.
So let's start at the foundation. Saad doesn't just say, hey, progressives have a different political opinion. He goes way further.
Oh, he goes right for the biology.
Yeah. He frames the progressive worldview as an actual biological and psychological contagion. He calls it a mind parasite.
A literal mind parasite.
Which is wild. How does a generally positive trait like empathy get categorized as a parasitic infection?
Well, the shift happens when Saad biologicalizes the debate. He argues that Western civilization is basically orchestrating its own collapse through this excessive, pathological overextension of compassion.
So it's like an autoimmune disease.
That is the perfect analogy.
Yeah. Because in a healthy body, the immune system is great, right? It protects you. But in an autoimmune disease, it gets confused.
It loses the ability to distinguish friend from foe.
Right. And it starts relentlessly attacking the healthy cells. So Saad is saying empathy is our social immune system, but it's gotten confused and is attacking our own logic and self-preservation.
Exactly. And to understand why it gets confused, you have to look at evolutionary psychology, which is his bread and butter.
Okay. Take us back to the Pleistocene era.
Right. So hundreds of thousands of years ago, we lived in small, tight-knit nomadic tribes. Maybe 50 people.
So you knew everybody.
You knew everybody.
Yeah.
And in that environment, empathy was a super highly adaptive survival mechanism. If you shared your food with someone who was sick,
Or protected a kid from a tiger.
you were literally ensuring the survival of your own shared genes. Empathy was bound by proximity.
Yeah.
It had a very limited radius.
It was designed to keep the tribe alive, not manage a globalized planet with 8 billion people.
Exactly. So Saad posits that this modern ideological mind parasite has hijacked those ancient empathy modules.
Because bad ideas act like viruses.
They look for vulnerabilities in the host's operating system. And our vulnerability is this deep-seated desire to be compassionate and to be seen as good.
I mean, we all want to be the good guy.
Right. But the fatal error, according to the text, is when this overextension of empathy elevates victimhood to a virtue.
This is where things get really controversial.
Yeah. Saad says when victimhood becomes the highest moral currency, society abandons objective reality. If a truth like a statistical fact or biological reality is perceived to be hurtful to a marginalized group,
The parasite forces society to suppress the truth.
Exactly. And you simply cannot run a complex civilization if you ignore basic reality just to protect someone's feelings.
Okay, so if empathy is hijacked like this, it has to manifest in the real world. It can't be an abstract psychological theory.
Oh, he definitely brings it down to earth.
Yeah.
He argues this creates a total inversion of how we evaluate right and wrong. He calls it the system of inverse morality.
The system of inverse morality. Let's break that down.
For centuries, Western moral frameworks praised things like strength, success, lawful behavior, merit.
The building blocks of a stable society.
Right. But under suicidal empathy, this hierarchy is totally flipped upside down. The strong, the successful, and the lawful are routinely demonized.
They become the oppressors.
Automatically. Their success isn't seen as hard work. It's seen as the unjust extraction of resources from the marginalized.
You see this on social media literally every single day. It's this exhausting battle of who is the victim and who is the oppressor.
It's a race to the bottom of the privilege ladder.
Yeah, because whoever is the most oppressed automatically wins the moral high ground. And on the flip side, destructive behaviors are just enabled or coddled because the person doing them is classified as a victim.
Exactly. And the societal implications are staggering. If success is viewed with suspicion, why work hard? Why follow the rules?
It paints a target on your back.
Right. You're just a beneficiary of an unjust system.
I like to use an ecological metaphor for this. Imagine a wildlife policy where you legally prohibit wolves from hunting deer because society decides it's cruel.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Right. In the short term, you feel wonderful. You save some deer. But long term, the deer population explodes. They eat all the vegetation. The soil erodes.
And the whole forest ecosystem collapses.
Including the deer, because the empathy was totally detached from how the ecosystem actually functions.
That maps perfectly onto his critique. He's saying progressive policymakers look at individual instances of suffering, the deer being hunted, and they implement massive interventions without caring about the load-bearing pillars of civilization.
But wait, let me push back a bit. Does he explain why the progressive elite would willingly adopt a morality that demonizes success? Because, these politicians and tech leaders are the successful ones.
Yeah, it's a huge paradox. Why build a moral framework where you are the villain? Saad suggests it's not a conscious, rational choice. It's a symptom of the pathology. The empathy is so overwhelming that the mere existence of inequality is perceived as a moral failing.
Even if the inequality is just natural differences in effort or merit.
Yes, the empathetic mind can't tolerate the disparity. It bypasses analytical reasoning and just assumes the gap itself is proof of systemic oppression.
Wow. So it just refuses to analyze. And that brings us to the actual street level because he applies this directly to public policy.
This is where the collateral damage becomes really quantifiable.
Let's talk about immigration because that's a massive flashpoint in the book. Saad claims empathy overrides common sense here, right?
Yeah. He points to situations where he alleges Western nations prioritize undocumented migrants over their own legal citizens, like homeless veterans.
Which, from an evolutionary perspective, he views as a broken social contract.
Exactly. A nation-state is functionally a macro-level tribe. Its fundamental reason for existing is to secure borders and prioritize its own citizens.
Citizens pay taxes and obey laws. The state protects them.
But when the mind parasite takes over, that contract is voided by emotion. The immediate suffering of a migrant at the border completely overrides the state's abstract obligation to its own struggling citizens.
It's like a parent giving away their kid's college fund to a sad stranger on the street.
The compassion is real, but the systemic betrayal is profound, and resources are finite.
Housing, healthcare, you can't just stretch it infinitely. And he applies the same lens to local issues, too, like public parks.
The park is an incredibly powerful microcosm for his whole argument.
Think about it. A park is a shared community asset. It's supposed to be safe for kids to play.
But under progressive empathy, a drug addict shooting up on a park bench isn't viewed as a public nuisance or a danger.
They're a victim of late-stage capitalism or the healthcare system.
Therefore, the empathetic response dictates extreme accommodation, safe injection sites, or just refusing to enforce loitering laws, because punishing the addict is deemed cruel.
But the collateral damage is that the park becomes totally unusable for the lawful community. We prioritize the feelings of one rule breaker over the safety of hundreds of families.
Right, and this dynamic peaks when Saad talks about property rights. Specifically, squatters' rights versus homeowners.
This one is genuinely wild. Property rights are the absolute bedrock of Western civilization.
Going all the way back to John Locke.
Yeah. But we're seeing cases where someone breaks into a home, changes the locks, and the legal system paralyzes the actual homeowner.
You can't use force to remove them, and you're stuck in civil litigation for months.
Because making the squatter homeless immediately is deemed cruel. It's inverse morality codified into law. The lawful homeowner is subtly cast as the oppressor who has excess capital so they can afford to suffer.
And the squatter is the ultimate victim who must be protected, even while actively committing a crime.
While the legal gears slowly turn, the homeowner is just financially ruined. And Saad says this unspooling is super visible in modern criminal justice reform too.
Yeah, he calls it the coddling of criminality. The focus shifts to restorative justice and avoiding incarceration at all costs.
The violent criminal is endlessly analyzed through the lens of their trauma. What systemic disadvantages drove them to this?
Which prioritizes the rehabilitation of the perpetrator over the absolute safety of the victims.
He even says framing basic self-defense as toxic is a symptom of this. Like when citizens defend themselves on a subway and get prosecuted for using force against a vulnerable individual.
Society is basically demanding its citizens become willing prey to prove how compassionate they are.
But okay, let me jump in and play devil's advocate here.
Please do.
By framing all these policies purely as pathological emotion, doesn't Saad conveniently ignore all the structural and economic data behind them?
How so?
Like progressives don't say they're letting people out of jail just because they feel bad. They point to decades of data showing that tough-on-crime mass incarceration policies were economically disastrous and didn't reduce recidivism. Or providing services in parks, they argue that's a data-backed public health strategy to lower HIV rates. It's not raw emotion, it's sociology. Does he engage with that?
It's a major line of critique against the book. Sociologists say he's building a huge straw man, but within Saad's framework, he actually anticipates this.
How does he counter it?
He insists the root origin of these policies is emotional pathology. He views all that sociological data as post hoc rationalizations.
So the empathy comes first, they decide on the policy they want, and then academics scramble to find data to justify the feeling.
Exactly. He calls the structural arguments intellectual camouflage. And rhetorically, that is incredibly powerful.
Yeah, it lets him completely sidestep the actual debate over recidivism rates.
He automatically positions his opponents as irrational subjects of a disease. You don't debate a virus, you eradicate it.
That is a terrifyingly effective way to win an argument before it starts. But to enact these policies, you need infected people in power. Which brings us to his psychological profiling of the Western elite.
This is where he attempts to map the epidemiology of the contagion. Who is patient zero?
He introduces this concept called existential privilege. What is that?
It's the idea that simply by being born in the modern West or into a certain socioeconomic class, you've won the cosmic lottery.
Clean water, safety, opportunity, you didn't earn it.
Right. And the ruling class academics, tech billionaires, they recognize this unearned advantage. And according to Saad, it creates a crushing burden of psychological guilt.
Survivor's guilt on a macro scale.
Exactly. They feel they don't deserve their safety. So advocating for open borders or radical wealth redistribution isn't actually driven by a genuine desire to help the marginalized.
It's moral atonement.
Yes, it's a coping mechanism. They are subconsciously punishing themselves by actively tearing down the civilization that gave them their privilege.
That ties right into the idea of luxury beliefs. Elite politicians advocating to defund the police because they live in a gated community with private security.
They get the dopamine hit of looking compassionate, while the working class suffers the actual consequences.
But Saad doesn't stop at socioeconomic class. He drives straight into highly explosive territory. Biological essentialism and gender dynamics.
This is where he relies most heavily on evolutionary psychology. He claims women and feminized societies are biologically more susceptible to this hyper-empathetic conditioning.
Okay, let's unpack the mechanics of that. He builds it around maternal empathy, right?
Yes. In evolutionary biology, the maternal instinct, the unconditional compassion a mother has for her infant, is basically the most powerful emotional force in our species.
And there's a harsh game theory logic to that because of the obstetrical dilemma. Human babies are born incredibly premature and helpless compared to other mammals.
A foal can walk hours after birth. A human infant is defenseless for years.
So if a mother's empathy was highly analytical or conditional, the baby would die. The bond has to be irrationally strong.
That's the baseline. But Saad argues that while this unconditional compassion is perfect for raising an infant, it becomes catastrophic when hijacked by the mind parasite and applied to macropolitics.
Because the brain's emotional hardware fails to distinguish between a helpless infant and a foreign adversary.
Exactly. When you apply maternal empathy to national security or criminal justice, it disables the society's threat detection mechanisms.
And he connects this directly to the vilification of traditional masculinity. Because if maternal empathy is the vulnerability, what is the immune system?
Traditional masculinity. Historically, the masculine role was protecting the tribe from external threats, enforcing boundaries, exercising skepticism of outsiders.
Conditional empathy. You only get our resources if you're part of our tribe.
Right. But under inverse morality, that protective instinct is rebranded as a pathology. Men who advocate for strong borders or tough-on-crime policies are labeled xenophobic or suffering from toxic masculinity.
I mean, the implications of this argument are just massive. He's taking maternal care, a life-giving instinct, and calling it the Trojan horse for Western civilization's destruction.
It is the ultimate biological reductionism.
No wonder it's a lightning rod. Evolutionary psychologists love it because it validates their Pleistocene-era worldview.
They see it as brave truth-telling against woke censorship.
While sociologists view it as dangerous pseudoscience, flattening complex global issues into a reductive mommy and daddy metaphor to justify regressive gender roles.
You absolutely cannot scale up the mother-infant dynamic to explain international law. But Saad commits to his diagnosis, and he actually offers a specific actionable cure in Section 5.
The survival manual. How do we resist the parasite?
It starts at the micro level. His very first prescription is to stop seeking empathy. Dopamine hits.
The virtue signaling on social media?
Exactly.
Okay.
Publicly displaying progressive compassion has become the main way to gain social status. You post a black square on Instagram, you get likes, you get a chemical high.
But it costs you absolutely nothing in real-world sacrifice.
Saad says you have to recognize this loop and consciously reject it. Stop performing empathy for an audience. Endure the discomfort of not being seen as the nicest person in the room.
Which leads to his second prescription, abandoning empathetic fence-sitting. An absolute end to infinite tolerance.
Karl Popper's paradox of tolerance. If a society is infinitely tolerant, it eventually gets destroyed by the intolerant.
So on a practical level, if someone is actively trying to dismantle your way of life, you have to stop decentering yourself to understand their lived experience. You just have to say firmly no.
Break the conditioning of guilt. And this ties into his geopolitical concept of demanding reciprocity.
How does that apply to foreign aid or immigration?
It means declaring that entry into a Western nation isn't a universal human right. It's a highly conditional privilege. Saad says we must unapologetically demand adherence to shared Western values like freedom of speech and equality of the sexes.
And if they reject those values, we owe them zero empathy. The borders must be conditional.
And with foreign aid, you don't send billions unconditionally to a regime that chants death to the West just because their people are suffering. You demand democratic reforms.
It's reasserting the transactional nature of healthy relationships.
A relationship without reciprocity is abuse. A geopolitical policy without reciprocity is suicide.
That brings us to the ultimate reframing in the text. Saad writes, "There is nothing more existentially empathetic than the dogged defense of the truth."
That single sentence is the linchpin of his counteroffensive. He totally redefines what true empathy is.
Think about your own life, guys. How often do you nod along with something you know is false, just to keep the peace?
Just so you don't seem uncompassionate.
Saad is saying in those moments, you aren't being kind. You are being a coward. You're contributing to the decay of shared reality.
By claiming that defending objective truth is the highest form of empathy, he allows his readers to feel morally superior, not by yielding, but by standing incredibly firm.
But wait, I have to push back hard on this. If we demand absolute reciprocity for every act of compassion, doesn't that turn empathy into a purely robotic transactional exchange?
That is the tightrope he walks.
Where's the line between defending truth and just lacking basic human charity? Do we need a signed contract of Western values before we hand a starving guy a sandwich?
His critics definitely target that vulnerability. But Saad would counter that he's not talking about the micro-level charity of handing out a sandwich. He's talking about macro policy.
Systemic policies.
Right. Yielding to emotion at the macro level guarantees the whole system collapses and then everyone starves. True, deep empathy is maintaining the wealthy, secure society that can produce the sandwich in the first place.
Wow. So protecting the rigid system is infinitely more empathetic than giving away the abundance until the system breaks? That is a massively powerful reframing.
And it is exactly why this book resonated so powerfully with the absolute pinnacle of the tech and finance elite.
Right. Let's talk about the billionaire endorsements because this is fascinating. Elon Musk heavily engaged with this concept. He used Saad's framework to coin his own concepts of shallow versus deep empathy.
Musk's adaptation is the perfect case study of how this appeals to the engineering mindset. Shallow empathy maps onto Saad's dopamine hits, short-term virtue signaling that harms the system in the long run.
While deep empathy is the willingness to make hard, unpopular, seemingly cold decisions to ensure the system survives.
It's like corporate restructuring. Shallow empathy says, don't fire half the staff, that's cruel. Deep empathy says, if I don't fire them today, the whole company goes bankrupt and everyone loses their jobs.
Very utilitarian. And Bill Ackman prominently endorsed these themes too, critiquing elite institutions for abandoning merit in favor of empathetic social engineering.
But let's point out the glaring irony here.
Please.
You have billionaires, people with the ultimate existential privilege, enthusiastically embracing a book that critiques elite guilt. Why would they love a framework that attacks the privileged?
Because it completely absolves them of that guilt. Progressive messaging tells billionaires their wealth is a policy failure built on oppression.
Which is a heavy burden if you internalize it.
But Sat tells them the exact opposite. He tells them their success is the beautiful result of merit and objective truth. The people telling them to dismantle their power are just infected by a mind parasite.
It transforms them from the villains of late-stage capitalism into the stoic defenders of objective reality.
It's the ultimate validation for the tech and finance sectors. They value hard logic and measurable metrics. A philosophy that labels emotion as a literal parasite is naturally going to be wildly appealing to them.
It provides a unified field theory for the culture wars. It connects local part safety, border policy, and corporate hiring under one single biological metaphor.
What a dense journey today. We've explored Gad Saad's thesis that an overextension of compassion is destroying the West from within. We traced inverse morality from property rights to the vilification of traditional masculinity.
And examined his ultimate demand for objective truth over feelings, and how that became a guiding philosophy for the tech elite.
It's a framework that forces us to question the limits of our own virtues. Whether you fiercely agree or vehemently disagree, understanding suicidal empathy is just absolutely vital right now.
It reveals the high stakes of our ongoing cultural battles.
But before we sign off, I want to leave you guys with a final lingering thought. Saad argues that unchecked empathy acts as a mind parasite that destroys a society by dissolving its boundaries.
Right.
But let's flip that entirely on its head. What happens to a society that entirely inoculates itself against empathy in the pursuit of pure, cold truth?
Oh, that's a dark thought.
Right. If suicidal empathy leads to chaotic collapse, does ruthless logic lead to a dystopia of a completely different kind? A society demanding absolute cold reciprocity for every human interaction might survive the brutal test of evolutionary biology. But is it a society you'd actually want to live in?
Where is the evolutionary balance point between caring for the vulnerable and relentlessly protecting the walls?
If the immune system attacks the body, it's devastating.
Yep.
And if you turn it off completely, you die from the very first external infection.
Finding that impossible equilibrium is the ultimate challenge.
Let us know your thoughts and theories in the comments below, guys. Do you think we're suffering from suicidal empathy, or are we just evolving? Thank you so much for diving deep with us today. Keep questioning the narratives, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.